Yeah, I felt a little bit sorry for her because how do you defend that? And yeah, but her explanation did not help the president or herself in any way.
It could have been worse, of
Now,
course. It could have
talking
been
it,
explained by Kamala Harris, who would have explained that the
oh,
thing is that the past has just gone before the present and the future is yet to come. And in a very real sense, the present is before the future, and that's why inflation is there.
and then we would just have mad cackling for about 60 seconds after that. But let's stick with the Biden White House, their incoherent and inconsistent decision making. Douglas, you've written about this, about how the president says something that's very sound 1 minute, and the next day he does something that's completely at odds with that. You talked about the wise words he said last week about Israel. And then within hours, he was attempting to prevent Israel's victory in Gaza by withholding arms shipments. How do you explain
Yeah.
this erratic behaviour?
Well, it's very strange. I mean, the best interpretation of it is that for some time, and you and I have discussed this before, Rita, for some time the president has talked a bit of one talk and acted in another way. Now, for those of us who want Israel to
Mm.
win in Gaza against Hamas, sometimes, that's the rhetoric has been unpleasant, but the actions have been supportive. So, for instance, at various times, President Biden, we presume, has sent out, for instance, Chuck Schumer to be critical of the Israeli reaction. Occasionally, Joe Biden has been critical himself, but he's done that in order, it seems, to placate a bit of the base in his own party, keep the students from going bananas all the time on campus, and hope to get in November, whilst at the same time supporting America's ally, Israel. The thing that was different this past week has been that it flipped exactly the other way around. The rhetoric from the president on the day
Mm.
was very good, very supportive, all about standing by our allies and all that sort of thing. And then in the evening, he stopped the delivery of arms supplies to Israel. Now, that is a very serious development because a lot of the sort of the talk, the chaff of the media cycle, particularly in America, is performative. It's for the base. It's for a certain bit of the base. It's for the 3 or 4 people watching some of the smaller left-wing networks. But the really difficult thing here, as I say, is that he actually did something which he had always said he wouldn't do. He's always held himself out
Mm.
as a great ally of Israel in its fight for survival and its fight for victory over its enemies. And here he is in charge in the White House, withholding arms at a time when Israel is pretty close to victory against Hamas. How you can say you're an ally and you're with someone till the bitter end, only to drop out at about last orders, I just do not know.
And that's what worries me because, as we know, actions are more important than words. And he has flipped that dynamic. And what would happen to Israel if they don't defeat Hamas after 7 months of this war, if in the end Hamas isn't completely eradicated?
Well, my view is, and I think it's a view that a lot of Israeli politicians and others feel, a lot of the Israeli public feel, is that you cannot destroy 80% of Hamas. You cannot leave them in, you cannot take them out of Gaza City, and you cannot take them out of a set of other towns and so on, and leave them intact in Rafah. And Rafah is reckoned to be not just where the remaining Israeli hostages are held, hostages who the rest of the world seems to have forgotten about, but the Israeli people quite rightly haven't. And there's no point in leaving that there and leaving those people there and leaving the heads of Hamas, including, it seems, Sinwar, the mastermind of the seventh, in Rafah.
Mm.
All it means is like putting out 80% of the fire, that the Israelis will withdraw from Gaza, and Hamas will grow back, will continue to subjugate the Palestinian population in Gaza, will continue to enrich themselves, and will prepare for the next attack against Israel. And my prediction is that these, every other year wars that Hamas has been provoking since it took control of the Gaza would just go on in that scenario. I think it is much better for the Israeli public and indeed for the Palestinian public in Gaza, that Hamas are done for, that it's over, and that other partners in the region can help in whatever way they can to rebuild the society there. It is not going to be an easy job, but it will be infinitely harder if Hamas still have any kind of a stronghold. So preventing Israeli victory, once again, would lead only to another set of cycles of conflict. And I don't think that's desirable.
No, it's not desirable for either party, as you explained. One thing we have seen in Israel, though, is the willingness of its people to fight for the country. Young people are willing to risk their lives to defend their country. That's not a sentiment that is shared in the West. In the UK, only a quarter of young people, 27%, said they were willing to be enlisted to defend their country. And one doesn't, I guess, Douglas, seek to protect what one doesn't value. And there's certainly a deep sense of self-loathing among many young people for their own country, whether we're talking about the UK, the US, or right here in Australia. What can be done to combat that? I feel that's such a destructive force with all sorts of long-term dangers.
Well, it has huge long-term dangers, and I spoke a bit about this a bit when I was in Australia recently. But I mean, the recent referendum in Australia was a very, very important blow to the people who would like to make all people in Western democracies, only in Western democracies, feel utterly wretched about everything about us. To make everybody in the majority feel that we're usurpers and colonizers and genocidists and all of these other outrageous claims, always claims made against the most free and the most fair societies on earth. But this has been done for more than a generation now. You tell young Australians that they have no right to the land. You tell young Americans that they're just there because they usurped the native peoples. You tell Europeans, even when they are the native peoples, that although they are the native peoples, they should be themselves usurped. Go on and on like that. And of course, you're going to have a lot of young people who think, well, why on earth would I risk my life for a country I've been told is rotten from the beginning? I think we need to turn this whole thing around, and I think it can be turned around. The young Israelis have shown it can be turned around. They've shown that when it really comes to brutal reality in your face, you can stand up and fight. And the young Israelis have. I hope that it never comes to that for young Australians and Americans and Canadians and British and Europeans. But if it did, that we would be tested. And I think a lot of people would fail that test because they've been taught to fail that test.
They have. Then we've had this poison in academia and elsewhere for decades. So I'm glad you believe it can be turned around. I do have my doubts. Now, before you go, I've got to ask you about this ongoing sham trial of former President Donald Trump. It's continuing in Manhattan. We've had Stormy Daniels testify. Much of her testimony, salacious details that are completely irrelevant to the case. We've had serial perjurer Michael Cohen on the stand, and it seems everyone is resigned to the fact that this is some sort of a show trial. It's a political case as much as anything. Former federal prosecutor Andrew C. McCarthy wrote in the New York Post that New Yorkers should be outraged at the mockery District Attorney Alvin Bragg is making of the state's legal system as the entire country looks on. Douglas, the entire country is looking on. But whatever the Democrats are trying to achieve here seems to be backfiring because the polls are pretty clear. Trump is increasing his lead, particularly in those crucial swing states.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary miscalculation by Democrat prosecutors and others. As you say, as these trials go on, Trump's lead seems to strengthen. Some people outside America might wonder why that is, and I think it's a couple of things. One is a lot of Americans have had bad experiences with the justice system, and so the idea that the justice system can be in some way rigged is a claim that they're sort of open to in a way that I think in Australia and Britain we sort of wouldn't be. But the second is that you see people like DA Bragg effectively putting on a trial in search of a crime. And that's what this trial has been. It's a trial in search of a crime. And Stormy Daniels took the stand not because she had anything new to say, although she did actually contradict previous testimony she'd given, but because, of course, it was meant to humiliate Donald Trump. There were salacious details. And, frankly, I mean, most people would be humiliated to hear even these allegations made against him. No, against themselves. Trump, as ever, amazingly, sort of has this ability to brush it off. If I were the Democrats and others, I would start to be worrying about this whole tactic of let's take him out by judicial means. There's all sorts of criticisms that can be made in every direction here. But the ultimate issue in America is the people. The people get to decide. They get to decide who to vote for and eventually who they do vote for. It's not up to DA Bragg. It's not up to anyone else. It's up to the American public. And they may yet surprise the world.
Well, I think that's what the Democrats are scared of. They don't want the American public to decide. And I think they were counting on a criminal conviction sealing the deal. But I don't think even if that eventuates, it's going to make a difference. Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Great pleasure as always. Thank you.